can't think of a better way to introduce this lesson than a recall of what happened several weeks ago when Michelle correctly listed the sermon I was supposed to do, and I didn't do it. I did a different one. I was supposed to have done how we deal with personal sin a few weeks back, and that's what she listed in the bulletin. And I preached the one on Galatians 2 about how you deal with public sin. So, when you make a mistake, you make it good. And so tonight, or this afternoon, I'm going to preach the one I should have preached several weeks ago in lieu of the fact that I didn't preach the one I was supposed to. Anyway, that's kind of how it works. I'm qualified to preach this lesson because I make multitudes of errors. I can't speak for you, I'm just saying from personal experience. I make lots of mistakes. And so this applies to me. I've read this countless times, wouldn't even attempt to give it a number, because this is my go-to scripture. When I get to thinking, oh, I did it again. Me and Peter, we be mates, as they say in Australia. Peter and I, his are recorded, mine are quite public on very many occasions where I have made a mistake. In fact, one lady told me one time, Jeff, you don't take your foot out of your mouth when you make mistakes, you just switch feet. I think she's got it right. Just a matter of time before I make another mistake. Warren just made that comment a while ago, and if I keep hanging around him, I will make more mistakes. No, I'm kidding you. But when you make a mistake, you got to deal with it. I mean, that's the bottom line. You can't just sweep it under the rug. Now, I know a lot of people do. They try to sweep things under the rug that's been done wrong or what we made mistakes on, but that is not the appropriate way to deal with mistakes. When people start talking about skeletons popping out of the closet, you got to ask the question, how did they get in there? Who put them in there and why? What solution did someone think would be the way to do things by stuffing something into a closet and hoping it goes away? Things don't work that way. And it especially doesn't work for our own individual selves. And I don't know what you've done wrong. I don't want to know. Please don't TMI me with anything. I'm not going to tell you what I've done wrong, a whole bunch of it, because I'm ashamed of it, frankly. It's not something worthy of telling again. In fact, one of the problems with dealing with personal sins is the fact that even though God says, I'll remember their sins no more, believe you me, God knows everything, so He knows what we did. And when He says, I'll remember your sin no more, He's just saying, I'm not going to hold you in account for it because you still sin and you know it, and that's one of the problems we have in dealing with our own personal sin. We still know that. And unfortunately, we have friends, I say that word sarcastically, who are more than happy to be in our lives and remind us of all those things that we used to do that were wrong. So how do you deal with personal sin? I can't imagine what you've done wrong, but I guarantee you it isn't as bad as Paul. I can't. Just picture in your mind, because the visual is rather disturbing to say the least. That's an understatement, of someone being stoned. I don't know how you visualize that, but it's not one of those deals where they lay a guy down like they're on a guillotine and they take a 40-pound block and they drop it on his head and he goes bloop like that and he's done. That's not how stoning works. Stoning is a process. You start throwing rocks at somebody, and if they're standing, it's not long before they're on their knees because of all the things, the projectiles hitting them and causing bruises and breaking bones. In fact, if you look at the science of it, very often it is said that when someone has been stoned, there's very rarely any bone in their body that has not been impacted in some way, broken, fractured. And that comes over the course of time. You don't just die immediately from those kinds of things. You can just pray that some stone hits you in the head so that you're unconscious while the rest of it goes on and you die unconscious. But it's not always the case. In fact, most of the time it's not. Now, if you can visualize that in your mind and the grotesqueness of that scene and how horrid that is and how graphic it is, picture Paul standing there holding the coats of those who stoned Stephen. A man of faith, a man who preached the truth and told people what they could do to get their lives right. And that was the response that he got. And they took him out and they stoned him. They killed him by throwing rocks at him. And there stood Saul, Paul, with those coats hanging on to him, approving of what had been done. I think sometimes, and this is open for study, I'd be glad to visit about it, but I think that projected or propelled him into the notorious persecution of which he was a great part of, as we find in Acts the 8th chapter. Saul breathing out threatenings and slaughter against the church. He was not going out and just telling them, shaking a finger, saying, you should not. He was dragging them out of the homes, delivering them to a council and voting, yes, let's stone them. Let's kill them. Let's put them under. That's what Saul did. Now, I don't know how you would deal with something like that, but I know we have today individuals come back from overseas and in a righteous war, doing those things that you and I dare not even think about, so that we can have the freedom and enjoy the freedoms we have today. And they come back with post-traumatic stress disorder, coming back after having done things that they have done, and then going back to a civil society and trying to function properly after having done those things. And it's serious. We finally caught on to that. Yeah, these boys coming back from war. Oh, that lost generation in World War I. Part of the reason that was a lost generation was not just the tragedies that occurred over in the battlefields, but the tragedies that occurred when they came home and could not readapt and fit into a society that was civil anymore, because of the horrors that they saw. Paul stood there approving. And then later on the road to Damascus, gets straightened out. I can't imagine that he was finished, but only interrupted by Ananias, who visited after having spent 3 long days eating and drinking neither one, looking at his life and what he had done, and asking the question of himself, how do I deal with this now? Look at what I've done. I cannot undo it. It's a Humpty Dumpty thing. It's broken. You can't put it back together again. How do you deal with that? Paul knew what he was talking about, not just by inspiration, if that wasn't enough, but he experienced this. I can't think of a better person to talk about how you deal with personal sin than Paul, because Paul knew it firsthand. And the idea that God had forgiven him was not lost on Paul at all. But don't think for a second he did not forget what he had done. In fact, recited much of what he had done. And in fact, called himself the least of the apostles because of what he had done. Paul had a rather low opinion of himself. In fact, that might have motivated him to do the wondrous works that he did. Which tells us there is a way to deal with it. In fact, it can be that some of the things you have done wrong, while they are not right and we would not promote them, they will give you an insight that might help you help someone else who's struggling with those same problems. It's how you use your flaws that will make them strong when you get over them. But you got to get over them. And so how do we do that? Well, Paul makes the comment, is in the first place, not that I've already attained or I'm already perfected. The first thing we need to understand is we're not perfect. And we understand that we're not ever going to be perfect. And that we can't undo what we have done. And we need to own our error. We need to be able to say, I'm a sinner, as all are. And take no comfort in the idea that because so many other people are, then I'm not so bad because I'm a sinner too. No, there's no comfort there. Believe me. There's not rejoicing at the family reunions in hell. It's just not going to happen. Because nobody wants to be there. And we have a record of that in Luke 16, where a man went to Hades and was in torment so bad, all he wanted was someone to touch the tip of the finger in water and touch the tip of his tongue, because he's tormented in the flames. He didn't want his brothers to be there. He loved his brothers, didn't want them to be there. And so when it comes to what we are and who we are, there's no comfort in the idea that we have sinned. That's not how we get over it. Deciding that, well, I had, pointing the finger, that's the famous thing, rationalizing, finding some reason why we did what we did, as though that's going to mitigate the fact that we sinned. You can't blame other people. You can't pawn it off on some situation or circumstance. We need to own our sin. And so Paul said, I'm not perfected. I'm not even close. But he says, here's what I do. And this is the theme of the next 3 or 4 verses. In verse 12, I press on. In verse 13, the one thing I do is in verse 14, I press toward. That's a theme right there. One of the things we have to understand about the sin we commit is that while we're dealing with the sin, and we do, we have to keep in our mind we don't ever quit. We cannot quit. We have to keep pressing on. It is so discouraging sometimes, and what I know people don't realize sometimes when they begin to get a little discouraged about their own flaws and their own sins, and they begin to slack off, and they begin to slide away. And by the way, most of the time that is the case. People don't just up and decide one Sunday morning, I was here today, I came, I saw, and I'm done with it, and I'm going to leave, never come back again. That's not how it happens. No, this is a process. This is a process where things happen in somebody's life and they gradually begin to go away. And that's how Satan attacks us. He doesn't give us a full frontal. He just chinks in our armor a little bit here, a dart there, and he weakens us a little. And pretty soon we get to the point where we're either totally belligerent against the truth, or we take that vaunted attitude, well, I've just sinned so much, I'm not worthy. I'm not worth it. And my response to that is always, you think way too lowly of yourself. Because no, Christ died for you because you were a sinner. If you'd been perfect, Jesus made that same comment. Nobody needs a physician if they're well. You only need a physician if you're weak, and he is the great physician. He came because you are a sinner. Because I am a sinner. He died for me. When I quit on Christ, that's when it ends. Christ will never quit on me. He will never forsake me. He will never leave me. God is going to be with us as long as we press on. And that's what he's saying. You want to deal with sin? The first thing you have to do is get it in your mind that I have to press on. I cannot quit because I made a mistake. It is so easy. And I've heard people say constantly, you need to do this or that or the other. I say, I tried that once, it didn't work. How many other things in your life is that the way you apply yourself to? I tried it once, it didn't work, so I quit it. I'll guarantee you this, anything you do in life, you tried more than once, and you failed more than once, if you ever got good at it. I've always liked Alexander Graham Bell's response to a reporter who says, how does it feel after so many thousands of failures to finally get the light to work, or the bell to work, or the phone to work, whatever it was he invented? And he said, I didn't fail 1,000 times, I found 1,000 times how it didn't work. He pressed on until he got it to work. That's Christian mentality, basically. We never quit. We are diligent. We continue on. And so the theme then for this text of how to deal with sin is you press on. You keep going. You never lose confidence in God, because really that's what it is. If you're thinking that you have to have confidence in yourself that you can do this, you're wrong, okay? Because you can't. All right? Look at Peter. How many times did he figure, oh, Lord, I'll never forsake you? I mean, do you realize that's not long after a couple of the apostles were arguing about who's going to be the greatest in the kingdom? I mean, that's not long after Jesus told Peter himself, get thee behind me, Satan. And now he's telling them, y'all are going to forsake me. And Peter's going, no, I'm not going to do that. Don't think the confidence needs to be in yourself. It's not. You cannot handle sin yourself. It's not possible. The only way you can handle sin is by following Christ and allowing Christ to do his work in you through what he has taught us in Scripture. That's how you handle it. But you've got to have the attitude, and then you've got to have the willpower to go through with it. He says in verse 13, I don't count myself to have apprehended, but this one thing I do. And by the way, it sounds like he says, this one thing I do, and then he lists four. Not true. The one thing about which he is talking is pressing on. Okay? That's what it's all about. But there is an accommodation of how we can press on. Here's how you can keep on keeping on. Two things that are critical for us to understand. One, forgetting those things which are behind. I believe that is one, and I think it's listed first for this reason. That is the one hardest thing that we have to deal with our sin, because we don't forget. God does not hold us accountable for it when he forgives us. And we can say, I know God's forgiven me, but, I did this one time, or I was this way one time. It is so often the case that great Christian potential is never reached because of our excuses about who we used to be. My mantra is, don't let your past define who you are. You are not the same today as you were 10 years ago, 12 years ago, 2 days ago. And if you're growing as a Christian, that's a good thing, because you are long and far beyond where you used to be. And back in the day, I did some dumb things I don't like talking about. They weren't smart. But I'm not going to do them again. I'm going to grow and I'm going to become better, but what I will not allow is somebody to define me and put me in a little box because 20 years ago I was dumb. Made a mistake. I did something terrible. I refuse to allow people to do that because God does not. And part of the process of pressing on to the goal is forgetting those things that are behind. And basically, I know people will remind you of who you used to be. But you need to let it be water off a duck's back, and you need to decide, I am who I am today. I'm going to be a Christian today. I'm going to serve God today. Yesterday is gone. Can't do a thing about it. What I'm concerned about is looking forward, and that's the next step there, forgetting those things that are behind, but reaching forward to those things that are ahead. You know, when Peter was walking on the water, and Jesus said, yeah, come on out. He steps out of the boat. When do you think it dawned on him that, you know what, I'm on water? I've often wondered about that. These little quirky things that I think of when I'm reading it. Because he got a ways out there, right? He gets a little ways out there before he starts looking around and going, what was I thinking? You know? What point did it happen that he realized, I'm on water? This ain't right. That's not what humans do. The Son of God, okay, but me? You can do all things through Christ. Don't you realize that? Peter walked on water as long as he was focused on Christ. Guess when he lost it? He started noticing the surroundings. He started being distracted. He lost his focus. If our focus is pressing toward God, where's our sight going to be? Where's our goal going to be? What are we going to be looking at? Not the mistake I made yesterday. No, sir. That's gone. I can't undo it. I can fix whatever I can fix, but I need to press forward, forgetting those things that are behind, and I need to keep my eye on the goal. People fall away from God because they have lost their sight. They've forgotten where their goal is. It's gone by the wayside, and sometimes it's weighed down by all of those things that we used to do or we did or we may still be doing and know we need to work on them and quit them. If we're going to fix sin, we have to use Christ's formula and forget those things that are behind and press on toward the goal and look at where we're going. That prize of high calling of God. I'm telling you what, and I've said it many times before, there's nothing here worth going to hell for. Nothing. I want to go to heaven. I want everybody I speak to go to heaven. I want everybody I'm associated with, the friends I have in this town, I want them to go to heaven. And I know how to get there because the Bible teaches me how to get there. And I am remiss if I don't tell people how to get there. I'm making a sad, terrible mistake if I don't share with them what God has told us to do in order to get to heaven. And if I'm so busy with that, I won't have time to worry about the flawed creature that I am. And oh, do I know me. And when you own it and you understand it, I understand the challenge of pressing forward. But I didn't do stuff Paul did, and Paul figured out the formula, and by inspiration, by the way, I know I can go forward. I can do the right thing if I'll just use this formula. Now, of course, Paul rarely lets things go that he doesn't reach up every now and then just to slap us and say, hey, wake up. And so he does that. Therefore, since we're pressing on to this goal, forgetting those things that are behind, reaching forward to that goal, therefore, and here's the little smack, let us, as many as are mature, have this mind. Do you know what he said there? If you don't take this formula and apply it to your life, you're not mature. His words, not mine. You're not being spiritually mature if you don't deal with sin the way Paul, through inspiration, tells us to deal with sin. And what happens is you end up with a product. If you deal with sin, and you deal with sin, and you deal with sin, and I deal with sin the right way, pretty soon we're all going to be on the same page. We'll all be unified in spite of all of our sin and problems. Because every one of us are sinners. Romans 3:23, that's a fact. But you know what? We can overlook that. We can help each other. We can encourage each other. And there are other scriptures we can go into for that. But it says, nevertheless, to the degree that we have already attained, let us walk by the same rule. Let us be of the same mind. And I like that verse stuck in there because what works for me, or what is bound upon me, works for you and is bound upon you. See, we don't run by different rules just because you got more money or you're better looking or whatever. That's not how it works. How it works is God gave a rule, It works for everyone who loves him and who's willing to obey him and do what he says. Now, when you don't, you're going to suffer. Whether it's here, but certainly there later in eternity, you're going to suffer if you don't follow this program. I believe a great issue in our culture is the fact that we rarely, and just as an implication, we rarely let anybody get by with forgetting those things that are behind us. Our past just seems to come back and weigh on us and burden us and haunt us. If you don't believe that, look at our culture and the concept behind reparations. I'm about sick and tired of hearing that in our government and our country. I'm just sick of that. I'm supposed to be held responsible for something my great-great-great-great-grandfather did, which he didn't, by the way. But if he did, okay, well, how does that apply to me? Ezekiel 33 makes it real plain, verse 18. Hey, everybody's going to be held accountable for themselves. And that's where I get the idea that I'm not going to hell for anybody. I love you dearly. But I'm going to heaven. I want to take you with me. I want you to walk beside me. I want you to help me go to heaven like I'm trying to help you. But I ain't going to hell for anybody. I don't care who you are, how close a kin you are, how good a friend you are, or how strange you are, and I don't even know you. It does not matter. I'm going to do what God says. And when you do what God says, there is a unity that transpires. In fact, it's brought out in 1 John 1, okay, where he talks about verse 7. If we walk in the light as he is in the light, then we have fellowship. But our fellowship is based on us walking in the light. If you don't walk in the light, you have no fellowship. That's just a fact. That's not a judgment that I make or that you make. That's what God said. If you do not walk in the light, you don't have fellowship. And you don't have it with God, and you don't have it with those who love God. And we can pretend all day long, but if we walk by the same rule as in verse 16, and be of the same mind, which Ephesians 4 through 6 points out, these one things that unify us, we'll all be on the same page. And that's how you deal with sin. Now, one of the jobs we'll have is visiting with people who are not right with God and in convincing them. You need to forget about those things that are gone. You need to reach forward to the goal, but you need to keep on pressing on. There is no quit in Christian, none. Because there is nothing worth having, or better than heaven, or something I'll have in lieu of heaven. Heaven is the goal, period, cut and dry. There's nothing can replace it. I want you to go to heaven with me. That's why I preach so hard sometimes, but from a sincere heart. I think a lot of folks will go to heaven because we all believe what God said, and we're trying to apply it to our lives. In lieu of that, please forgive each other. Please find a way to figure out how to make things easier for people to understand. You're not perfect, okay? We're not denying that, but it's not okay. But it's okay because we're all not perfect. You need to be here. You need to be with us. We need to be unified. We have our strength in unity, brothers and sisters. We really do. But we can't have it if we don't deal with sin right. And we've got to press on. We cannot quit. I invite you not to quit. If you're quitting right now, if you have that in your mind, please remove it. If it's a personal thing, do it personally. Take care of it. You can do that. God will help you through these times. If it's a public thing, we are more than happy to say, yeah, we're all sinners. Please come. Let's help each other get to heaven. And those who are spiritual can help those who are a little bit weaker. Because we all need to go to heaven. One of these days, we're not going to have to worry about this old frame and this walk of life. So we encourage you with the song we sing as we stand. Won't you come?